Welcome back to the Casual Athlete Fantasy Podcast here on YouTube. I'm welcoming a new guest with us today. We've got Tim. He's calling in from Canberra. He's our newest fantasy analyst. So if you're a close follower of the channel, you probably would have seen on the community tab, we put the feelers out for a writer. Look, Tim has surpassed all expectations. He's now on the show. And Timmy, mate, I'm going to give you an easy one to start off. We've got Payne Haas. You've given him a 10 out of 10 fantasy rating for this year. Why is that?
Yeah, thanks for coming, Dan. That's correct, mate. Look, Payne Haas is a staple mainstay in the fantasy. His starting price was a hefty 806, but I mean, if you started with him, he didn't disappoint. Obviously, you do have to hold him through that Origin period. But look, he didn't disappoint. He remained pretty injury-free for the whole year, and he rewarded fantasy owners.
Yeah, that injury component's massive because in previous years, I feel like he always picks up a little niggle. There's always something that reduces his minutes. The only thing that stopped him this year was when the Broncos were too far ahead. So, yeah, he's becoming that guy. He's just re-signed with the Broncos as well. So he's going to be that guy for us in fantasy for a long time now. Now, just for everyone tuning in, this is a rating of all the Broncos players. So their fantasy performances for this year. We're going to talk about how they might go next year as well. And the next one here is Tommy Flegler. Now, really interesting one this year. He sort of failed to take off a lot of the time, but he is moving to the Dolphins next year. Tim, how do you feel about his fantasy performances this year? And do you think that he's a chance at improving at Redcliffe next year?
Yeah, look, possibly. If he gets a couple more minutes, I think his minutes were pretty detrimental. Points per minute, as you mentioned before we started, is up there. Look, he averaged 35. His highest was 52 for the year. Look, I did give him a 4, but I think there's room for improvement.
Yeah, I know that Redcliffe pack, it feels very democratic. Like, you got guys like Mark Nichols and Jesse Bromwich, and they just sort of get different minutes each week. They get rested at different times as well. The thing that's going for Flegler here, though, is that I think he's their best pure prop. So he's coming in. He's sort of in the prime of his career. I think he's ready to take that step. I'm not going to say that we need to buy him right now, but there's a chance that he's one of those breakout guys who steps it up next year with. He'd really need 55 minutes each week to make it work, but it could be 55 minutes, 50 to 55 points. So I'm intrigued by him. Let's go to another guy in that pack. And sorry, you were going to say something on Flegler before we go to Carrigan?
Oh, look, I was just going to say, you never know what Wayne Bennett's going to do, one to watch.
He might be playing on the edge. Paddy Carrigan, this is a guy we do know a bit about, though. Look, 10 out of 10 you're giving him here. I'd probably go around that 9 out of 10 mark myself. I just feel like there were times where his minutes were really low, especially through Origin. But when you look at him outside of Origin, he's been a top-tier fantasy weapon, right?
Yeah, 100%. Look, he probably could be 9. I didn't delve down into the points. Maybe he was a 9.5, but look, he was a bit of a point of difference. Owned by a fair bit of by the fantasy league, around 20%. He averaged just shy of 60, and his consistency was up there. He didn't have many scores under 45, and he did show the ability that he can go large. I think his high score was around 97 for the year.
Yeah, that 97 was crucial too, because it was at a time when people were fighting for those playoff spots in fantasy. So I had a lot of happy commenters when they got Carrigan that week. We're going to blast through a few guys here now. Some of the lower tier options in this pack. Look, Payne Haas, Paddy Carrigan, they're eating up all the minutes. Flegler, he's sort of in the middle. Marty Tapau, 4 out of 10. Anything to say here?
No, not particularly. Look, I mean, if you just looked at his stats, he doesn't get big minutes, and is his best fantasy days behind him since he made the move up north from Manly, possibly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The way he plays, it's just not going to translate to big minutes and big stats. Corey JENSEN, now he's a guy who he's had moments where at the Cowboys and at the Broncos, he's kind of looked like a guy who could step up. I just question how much they rate him there, because he never seems to get the minutes that you expect him to get when there are injuries. So I think he's a case of could be a fantasy asset, but probably not a real enough sort of prop prospect for 50 minutes to get those minutes.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Unless he was guaranteed more minutes, and it really depends on his starting price. I mean, fantasy is all about the cash, mate. It'd be one to watch, but probably not unless he was guaranteed more minutes.
If he cashed right down though, he got down to 250k. You went into Origin. That's where a guy like Palacia might also come in. Palacia, he was 250k heading into Origin. If they had better buys, I might have used him as a cash out, but they only had the one major buy round this year. 3 out of 10 is fair. Look, I looked at him and I thought maybe he could translate some of the guys missing games to Origin into some points. He didn't really do that this year. He has done that in previous years, but it doesn't seem to be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think you covered it, mate. I've got nothing else to add there.
I'm going to stop stealing your thunder here. I'm going to throw Billy Walters across to you, man. Billy Walters. We're going into hooker now, moving out of the middle forwards. So what do you got here?
Yeah, look, I only gave Billy a 4 out of 10. I know he's their main hooker. You know, he did get a fair bit of minute-wise. Like I think he played most of the games were 80 minutes, and he still only averaged just over 30. Yeah, I'd be looking elsewhere.
Yeah. He's had some big games though. Like I don't know if they're sticking out in my head too much. I wouldn't be buying him for fantasy, but I feel like a few draft opponents have had him. No one's had Corey Pakes at any point. I'm questioning whether I think they've got a stronger hooker in reserve grade as well that they're sort of backing to take into that role. So I don't think Pakes is going to be the guy at any point. No. It's the timeshare option. We'll go into the edge back rowers. So now this is an interesting one here. Jordan RIKI, and I'll hand him over to you. But Jordan RIKI, I feel like on the field, he's taken steps each year. So last year to this year, he seems stronger. He seems more mature. He seems tougher. Is that going to translate for fantasy though?
Yeah, possibly. Look, I mean, he was a tricky starting price. I think he was around 600,000. So fantasy wise, what you're going to do with him? I think so. He has progressed every year. You know, back from a few years ago when he was a cow. I picked him up. I think what was it, 2020, 2021. He did well for his price, kept him and cashed him out. But this year, yeah, look, he's got some pretty good defensive stats and attacking wise, you know, he can score. So, you know, yeah, possibly next year, maybe mature a bit more and you know, maybe he'll make more of an impact in fantasy.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever play him in classic fantasy. He's a guy to watch out for in draft leagues though. Like if you're running with a later pick, you can't get Dave Fafita, John Bateman, then he could be a guy that's pretty serviceable, especially if the Broncos are playing well. Roll through to Kurt Catewell, and for me, Catewell is one I'm much less excited about for fantasy. And look, neither of those guys are in your classic team, but in a draft team, I just don't see Catewell as having that high ceiling that RIKI has for next year. So for me, he's a 5 out of 10, but his ceiling is sort of a 6 out of 10. Whereas RIKI is a 6 out of 10, but his ceiling is more like that 8 out of 10. So I'd be steering clear on this guy.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I think that's pretty fair.
Beauty. And then Piakura. Did you get Piakura this year?
Mate, I didn't get Piakura. Did you?
No, I didn't either. That's why I was throwing to you.
No. I saw some other people did, but no, I didn't. Yeah, you know, he did have a low starting price. His base stats are pretty good. Yeah, maybe more minutes. He, you know, maybe one to watch for next year.
Yeah, he's an attacking stat guy though, right? Like you look at his big scores, and there were all days where he had big attacking outings. The thing about that is though, if you're an attacking stat guy and you get attacking stats, then it's not a bad thing. And we'll talk about Reece Walsh in a bit as well. He's kind of in that category too, where they're not reliable and they've got to be one of the best players on the field to score well for you in fantasy. But if they're doing that, they're doing that. We'll go Xavier Willison here. Now, I'll let you talk about Xavier Willison this year. Now, I'm going to add some thoughts on the future there as well.
Let me grab his notes. Yeah, look, looking back at that rating, maybe he could have been a 3 out of 10. Looking back on that 4 might have been a little bit generous. You know, I think a lot of people brought him in, you know, maybe cashing out and thinking he might have been a cow. Yeah, he flew under my radar. I really didn't, you know, rate him too much.
See, I was watching him, and for me, he's very high on that eye test. So when I'm watching him, sort of seeing some reserves highlights, watching him in grade, he just looks like one of those guys where, I mean, he's massive. He moves well. He can sort of beat a tackle. I feel like he's one of those guys where he's probably an off season or two in the weights room away from making that breakout. So there's going to be a season where everyone makes a lot of money off Xavier Willison. And if you don't get on first thing, you're going to be left behind. So for me, I think 4 out of 10 is nice. Like he was probably a 2 out of 10 this year, but 4 out of 10 factors in that potential. I think there's going to be a season where he's an 8 out of 10. Maybe not next season, but possibly the season after. Yeah, that's a juicy one. We're going into the halves now. So Adam Reynolds, Tell me about Adam Reynolds this year. What do you think of him? Look, 50 average. Do you think that's fair for him?
Yeah, I mean, in years gone by, you would see him in a lot more teams. I mean, if you had him, he did a job for you. Average of 50 in the halves. It's pretty solid. You know, the quality of halves getting around now, you are looking for a little bit more. But in saying that, for old fella getting around, he will do a job for you.
Yeah, I think through the mid-season he was interesting because he was never really an origin prospect. Like there needed to be a few injuries for him to get in that spot. If the Broncos had better buys again, like they played, I think it was round 13 they played, and they had buys for round 16 and 19. So when we're looking at those major buy rounds, if a guy like Adam Reynolds had the Parramatta schedule and he was playing every major buy round, he would have been in every team and he would have been a must-have just because he's so consistent. And like we talked about at the start of the year, Adam Reynolds has averaged between 48 and 52 points basically every year of his career. He's going to do that year after year. And if you look at him next year, if he's above his starting price, he's not value. If he's below his starting price, he's value. That's the answer to that question. I'm not going to answer it again next year. So for Reynolds, we'll look at that schedule, we'll look at that price, and that's as simple as it is for Reynolds. He always plays in good sides. Working through the halves here, Ezra Mam, a 4 out of 10. I do distinctly remember Ezra Mam starting the year on fire. I think he had a couple of doubles. He had a couple of games. Look, if you're a half and you're scoring a double, you're only getting 50. It's not the best thing, but he's had those big moments. Why do you have him rated lowly here?
Just on that inconsistency, really does, rely on his attacking stats. Reynolds does a lot of the kicking duties, so he is taking points away from Mam. Mam heavily relies on run meters, tries, try assists. That inconsistency, I gave him a 4.
Yeah, fair play. There were some games where he scored tries and had sub 30 points as well.
Yeah.
I think he's one of those guys who is better on the field than he is for fantasy. He's interesting in Supercoach, though, because Supercoach gives you 17 points for a try, 10 points for a line break, 12 points for a try assist. Like he racks up some decent scores there, but for fantasy, where it's more about kick meters, consistency, not missing tackles, probably not the guy to go for. And then JOCK Madden, look, his latest game was pretty good. So is this 4 out of 10 based on his performances when he played, or just the lack of performances there?
Bit of both. Lack of performances. It was hard to sort of incorporate, some of the third string, halves, hookers. It was really hard because, if you just base it purely off score, they would probably rate a little bit lower. I tried to encompass, a few other things, prospect, average, a lot of other things into my scores. So, yeah, look, that's why I gave him a 4. Yeah. There could be an argument that it could be a little bit lower.
Fair play. I mean, I think if you got a starting spot somewhere, he's pretty interesting. He takes the line on. He can kick enough if he's not partnering with Reynolds. He's not the worst, but a guy here who is very interesting, and he's a guy I've had in a couple of draft leagues. He averaged, I think it was 47.5, something like that this year. He's out this week with a bye. But Herbie Farnworth, bit of a weapon, big work rate. It took him a couple of months before he had too many games below 150 meters as well. So I reckon he's one of those guys where he was one of the best this year. If you had him from the start, he was really consistent, didn't miss many games, wasn't talked about by too many. I'm just thinking about next year at the Dolphins. Do you think that's, is it an upgrade in that he'll get more attention in the attack, or is it a downgrade in that the situation is a bit tougher for him next year?
Yeah, it could go either way. Might not be getting as quality ball. I'm not too sure. That could go either way. Look, Herbie did fly under the radar for me, and I was pretty surprised when I delved into his stats for how well he did. I didn't have him, but his stats were respectable for the year. That's for sure.
Yeah, we had him on the pod list for a lot of the year, actually, especially when Jack Bird was out of the picture, because of the guys who are named as centers, he was one of the most consistent. His stats were almost back row-esque with then that upside of attacking stats. So I rate him big time. The other guy here is Tony Staggs, and he's sort of the opposite when we're looking at centers. He's a guy who I have so many memories of him running 50-plus meters and shouting, "This is our house." The crowds. And if you got points for that, he'd be maybe a keeper. Without that, it's a 6 out of 10, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I got nothing to add, mate. That's you encapsulated pretty well.
Look, I think for him, he's shown glimmers in previous seasons of a bigger work rate. Because this year it came together for him on the attacking side, where he got those attacking stats, but he can get those work rate stats. If he could bring those two things together, he's got the recipe for a keeper. Right? But then we'll go Reece Walsh, 6 out of 10. Look, this could be a bit harsh. Personally, I'm thinking. But what was your rationale here behind Reece Walsh? Obviously, some big scores, but maybe some.
Look, consistency wise, look, he can put it together. And tale of two seasons, really. You just never know. This season, you just never know which Reece is going to show up on the day. I had a point in this season where I went to change out bring in another fullback, and it was a toss up between Reece and Kalen Ponga, and I went with Kalen Ponga, and it paid off in spades. Yeah,
that's a big time move right there. The other thing is that suspension came at a really bad time. People were trying to use their trades smartly at that point, and Reece made it very hard for them. Then we'll pound through these wingers here. So Selwyn Cobbo, 5 out of 10. Look, Selwyn Cobbo, he's an exciting guy to watch. He's interesting for Supercoach. I don't think he's got the work rate for fantasy. I'm going to throw Corey Oates to you at a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, injury affected year. Obviously not Corey's year this year. 4 out of 10. Look, he did put up a decent score of 62 this year, but he hasn't actually scored a try this year. And as you said, relies heavily on attacking stats.
Hasn't scored a try this year.
Not in 2023. Wow. No.
Oh my god, I didn't even know that. That's insane. 4 out of 10 is pretty good, considering no tries. Oh wow, that's brutal. Considering like guys like Arthurs and look, I'm just going to jump ahead. Mariner as well. They were scoring tries aplenty when they were filling in.
Yeah, and after I gave you this analysis, Dean Mariner had a ball last weekend. He put up a massive score.
Yeah, I mean, look, the benefit of hindsight there. Yeah. He could be one though, actually, because he's pretty interesting. Like Dean Mariner and Tristan Saylor, who I don't have the picture for, they're two young guys who. They've shown glimpses. They've shown glimpses of being potentially those fantasy products. I'd keep an eye on Mariner if his price is good in future seasons, but it may not be with that big score.
Yeah, no, I agree.
All right, thanks for coming on, Tim. That is our Broncos analysis, so Broncos end season review. We went way longer than we were meant to there, but there's a lot to talk about with Brisbane, right?
That's it, mate. Look, we'll try and cut it down next one. Thanks for having me.
Yep, love having you, mate.